and you just smile because in your head it's perfect. Perfect for bending, stretching, sitting, reaching for tea without complaining. Perfect for living style. That's negotiable comfort. That's sacred. You even find yourself giving little speeches to friends, sometimes out loud, sometimes just in your own head. I'd rather enjoy my evening than strangle myself in skinny jeans. And strangely, people stop arguing after a while. They see the calm in your movements, the lack of wincing, the quiet satisfaction. You've won without trying, simply by choosing to exist comfortably. And the best part, it's contagious. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, your friends start noticing. They begin to respect the chair you pick, the shoes you wear, the scarf you wrap around your neck. Comfort has a kind of understated authority. So next time someone questions your choices, the relaxed shoes, the soft jumper, the perfectly sagging sofa spot, just smile and let them watch. Because you're not just choosing comfort, you're mastering it. And frankly, that's a victory worth celebrating quietly every single day. It's funny how memory works as you get older. Names gone, completely gone. You'll meet someone new, shake their hand, and somewhere inside your brain, the words have evaporated, but the utterly irrelevant details. Oh, those are crystal clear, like the exact shade of the curtains in their living room 10 years ago, or the fact that they once wore mismatched socks to a Christmas party. You don't need that information. It serves no purpose, but it's somehow impossible to forget. And the more you try to remember a name, the more it slips away. So there you are, smiling, politely calling someone mate or friend, all the while rehearsing the tiny, unnecessary facts that your brain has filed away forever. You'll remember the story of their cat, the brand of coffee they bought once, or the exact time they tripped on the pavement. But their name, poof, vanished. The strange part is, it almost becomes a superpower. You can recall all these odd, seemingly useless details that make conversations feel familiar and personal. You can tell someone, I remember the scarf you wore on that snowy day in 2012, and they're stunned even if you can't remember their name. And you realize maybe names aren't that important anyway. What matters is the tiny mosaic of moments, the quirks and little stories, the bits that stick and linger. Those are the things that make someone memorable, and somehow that feels more satisfying than remembering a simple name ever could. Do you catch yourself overthinking the simplest things? You start out with something tiny, choosing a sandwich, replying to a message, deciding whether to leave the house now or in 5 minutes. And before you know it, you're deep in analysis, weighing options that don't really exist. You stand there, genuinely considering all the possible outcomes, as if the future depends on whether you choose white bread or brown. And at some point, you catch yourself. There's a brief pause, a moment of clarity, and you realize you've spent far longer thinking about the thing than it would have taken to just do it. That's usually when the laugh arrives. Not a big laugh, more of a quiet, private one. The kind that says, ah, I see what's happening here. You're not annoyed, you're not frustrated. You're just mildly amused by your own mind, wandering off with confidence and absolutely no sense of proportion. And the nice thing is, once you notice it, the spell breaks, the decision becomes easy again. You choose something, anything, and the world continues exactly as it did before. Nothing collapses, no one complains, the moment passes. So when you catch yourself overthinking the small stuff, it's worth smiling at it, because that little laugh isn't giving up, it's understanding. And sometimes that's all you really need to move on, quietly and comfortably, with the day unfolding just fine. There's a moment in life when bedtime quietly shifts. No announcement, no discussion, no dramatic decision. It just happens earlier than you expect. One day you're someone who stays up late because you can, and the next you're glancing at the clock and thinking, well, that's probably enough for today. What's interesting is how reasonable it feels. There's no rebellion, no sense of missing out. You're not tired in a dramatic way, you're just done. The day has had its say, and you've listened politely. Even the idea of staying up feels like unnecessary effort, like insisting on dessert when you're already perfectly content. You start planning evenings differently without quite realizing it. Films get paused halfway through with the calm confidence that they'll still exist tomorrow. Books fall gently onto the bedside table instead of being finished. There's a quiet satisfaction in knowing you don't have to push yourself anymore. You've earned the right to stop. And the best part is the morning, waking up earlier, doesn't feel like punishment. It feels spacious. There's time for tea, for sitting quietly, for easing into the day without rushing. You realize that the earlier bedtime wasn't about getting older. It was about choosing peace over resistance. So when you find yourself heading to bed earlier than you once would have, don't fight it. You're not missing anything. You're simply listening to a quieter rhythm. Now, and honestly, it's a rather pleasant one to fall asleep to. There's a quiet moment that sneaks up on you at some point in life, when you realize you've picked something up again that you once put down for good, a hobby, something you were absolutely certain you'd outgrown, not abandoned temporarily, finished with. Maybe it's an old book or a bit of music you haven't listened to in years. Maybe it's something you haven't even thought about for decades. You don't make a big decision about it. You just find yourself doing it, almost by accident, and wondering why you ever stopped. What's different now is the pace. You're not trying to be good at it. You're not trying to turn it into anything. You're just enjoying the shape of it, the familiarity, the feeling of your hands remembering what to do before your head catches up. It's strangely comforting, like meeting an old friend and realizing you don't need to impress each other anymore. And there's no urgency, no sense that it has to lead anywhere. If anything, the joy comes from knowing it doesn't. You can put it down again tomorrow and pick it up next month, and it'll still be there, patient, unbothered. It's a small reminder that not everything in life needs to move forward. Some things are happy to wait for you to come back, quietly, when you're ready. And when they do, they fit into your life in a way they never quite did the first time around. Weekends used to arrive with a bit of drama. There was anticipation, plans, a sense that something had to happen. At some point, though, the rhythm changes quietly, without announcement, and weekends become something else entirely. You still notice Friday, of course, but instead of excitement, it's more like relief, a gentle exhale. The weekend isn't a blank canvas anymore. It's a softer version of the week, familiar, predictable, comforting. Saturday mornings arrive earlier than they used to, often without effort. You wake up naturally sometimes before the alarm, and there's a brief moment of confusion before you remember there's nowhere you have to be, and somehow that's better than sleeping in ever was. You find yourself doing small, unremarkable things, a bit of tidying, a slow cup of tea, maybe a walk that has no real destination. There's no rush to make the most of it. The enjoyment is quieter now, tucked into the spaces between tasks, and then Sunday comes along carrying that familiar feeling that used to mean dread. But even that softens with time. It becomes more about easing into the week than resisting it. You prepare gently, you put things in their place, you wind down without fighting the clock. Nothing about weekends is worse. They're just different, less loud, less ambitious, more forgiving. And somewhere along the way, You realize this new rhythm suits you perfectly. It's not about escaping life anymore. It's about settling comfortably into it. There's a particular kind of joy that sneaks up on you as you get older, and it's not the big, dramatic kind, it's the joy of small improvements, the kind no one else notices, and honestly, you don't really want them to. It's things like finally fixing a cupboard door that's been slightly off for years. Nothing dramatic changes. The kitchen looks the same, but every time you open it, there's a tiny moment of satisfaction, a quiet sense that the world is, at least in this one small corner, behaving itself, or replacing something that was technically working, but only just a kettle that took too long, a light bulb that flickered, a drawer that needed a very specific jiggle. Once it's sorted, life doesn't get better in a noticeable way. It just gets smoother, and that smoothness starts to matter. What's strange is how invisible these improvements are to everyone else. You don't announce them, you don't point them out, you simply enjoy them privately, like a small secret between you and your environment, a mutual understanding that things are now slightly improved. And the more of these tiny fixes you make, the calmer everything feels, not because anything big has changed, but because fewer things are quietly irritating you, fewer sighs, fewer eye rolls, fewer moments of mild resistance. So when you catch yourself feeling oddly pleased about a quieter hinge or a better fitting lid, don't dismiss it. That's not boredom, that's wisdom. It's the quiet joy of small, everyday improvements, the kind that make life feel just a little bit more settled, one unnoticed upgrade at a time. So there's this thing that happens when you get a bit older. Maybe it's subtle at first, or maybe you don't notice until one day it hits you. Every room you go into suddenly seems to have a chair that's yours, not literally yours, of course, but somehow it's the one you gravitate to. You walk into the living room, and there it is. The cushions are slightly too soft, the angle of the backrest just right. You settle in, and immediately everything else feels wrong. The sofa too wide, the other chair too upright. Somehow this chair gets you, then the kitchen, same thing. There's a seat that calls to you, maybe by the window or near the radiator. You don't choose it consciously. You just end up there, day after day. It's like the universe quietly assigned it to you, and you're too polite to say no. The funny part is, no one else notices. Friends sit down, shrug, shuffle uncomfortably, but the chair remains your chair. You try sitting somewhere else just for a change. It's okay for a minute or two, but eventually you're back in the chair that fits your body, your rhythm, your slightly creaky knees. And the real kicker, you start noticing it everywhere. When you visit your parents, the same chair phenomenon exists. Hotels, pubs, even friends' houses. There's always one chair that somehow makes sense. It's not a big deal, but somehow it's comforting, familiar, like a little anchor in a world that's otherwise constantly changing. So next time you settle into a chair and sigh without really thinking about it, know this: you've officially discovered one of Middle Age's most understated joys. Your chair has chosen you, and really, that's not too bad at all. There's a very particular kind of satisfaction that arrives quietly as you get older, and it's the moment you realize you know exactly which route through town avoids chaos. Not the fastest route on paper, not the one the sat-nav insists on, but the one that simply works. You don't announce it. You don't feel the need to explain it. You just turn left where everyone else goes right, ease down a side street, glide past a row of parked cars, and suddenly the world feels calmer. The lights are kinder here. The traffic moves differently. You've slipped through the gaps without anyone noticing. What's funny is how instinctive it becomes. You don't really think about it anymore. Your hands just turn the wheel, your feet adjust automatically, and somewhere deep down there's a quiet confidence that says, this way. You've learned this route over years through roadworks, school runs, temporary closures, and one disastrous diversion you still haven't forgiven. And every now and then you catch a glimpse of the main road you've avoided. Cars stacked nose to tail, indicators flashing in frustration, people gripping their steering wheels like it's a competitive sport. You feel a small, private triumph, not smugness, just relief, a gentle sense that you've made the right choice. It's not about speed anymore, it's about flow, about choosing the path that keeps your shoulders relaxed and your breathing steady, knowing where the bottlenecks are and quietly stepping around them. And maybe that's one of the underrated perks of getting older, not knowing everything, but knowing enough to move through the world with a little less friction, one calm side street at a time. There's a quiet satisfaction that comes from looking up at the sky and knowing what's about to happen. Not checking an app, not asking anyone, just glancing upward and thinking, yes, that's rain later. It's not dramatic knowledge. You're not forecasting storms or issuing warnings. It's more subtle than that. The colour of the clouds, the way the light looks a bit tired, the stillness that creeps in before the air changes its mind. You don't announce it loudly, you just mention it casually, almost as an aside, and when it happens, that's the moment. The rain arrives exactly when you expected it to, or the sun holds on just long enough to prove you right. You don't celebrate, you don't even smile much, but inside there's a small contained thrill. A quiet yes. What makes it better is that no one really notices. They'll say something like, oh, it's turned, hasn't it? And you'll nod as if this was all inevitable. You don't mention that you knew half an hour ago purely from the way the sky looked. That knowledge is for you. At some point, this becomes part of your identity. You start trusting the sky more than the forecast. You'll glance outside before leaving the house. Adjust a coat, choose shoes accordingly. It feels sensible, earned, almost wise. And when you do get it wrong, which does happen, you don't mind too much, because the act of looking up, of paying attention, feels grounding in itself. You're part of the day, not just reacting to it. So next time you step outside, pause for a moment, look at the clouds, the light, the way the air feels. If you get it right, enjoy the quiet satisfaction, and if you don't, well, at least you notice the sky, and that, somehow, feels like a win too. You've been listening to Quiet Thoughts for Grown-Ups, and now history explained with the confidence of a man holding the wrong map. This is Balmy Biographies. Alfred the Great was born in 849 AD, a time when England was less a country and more a collection of damp arguments connected by mud. He was the youngest son of King Ethelwulf of Wessex, whose name looks like someone dropped a Scrabble set and decided to keep the result. Nobody expected Alfred to be king, mainly because he had several older brothers who were doing a perfectly good job of getting killed by Vikings. The Vikings, at this point in history, were essentially Scandinavia's way of saying hello with axes. By the time Alfred reached adulthood, most of England had been helpfully reorganized into something called the Danelaw, which was Danish for our stuff now. Alfred was described as clever, pious, and not very keen on being stabbed, which already put him ahead of many rulers. He spent part of his youth travelling to Rome, where he learned important continental skills such as reading, praying, and realizing that England could really do with some indoor plumbing. In 871 he became King of Wessex after his brother Ethelred died, possibly from wounds, possibly from trying to pronounce his own name too quickly. Alfred immediately faced the problem that the Vikings were everywhere, including places that technically belonged to him, like outside and most directions. After several battles, Alfred was forced to hide in the Somerset marshes disguised as a normal person. This led to the famous incident where a peasant woman asked him to watch her cakes, and he let them burn, proving that even great leaders can be defeated by basic domestic multitasking. Historians still debate whether this story is true, but it feels emotionally accurate. Eventually, Alfred reorganized his army, invented a system of fortified towns called burhs, and built a navy, which was revolutionary because until then England's main defence against sea invasion had been hoping the sea would behave. He defeated the Viking leader Guthrum, who agreed to be baptized, presumably after Alfred explained that Christianity came with fewer surprise axes. Alfred didn't just fight, he also believed in learning. He translated books into Old English, encouraged education, and started the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a sort of national diary that mainly recorded who had invaded this week. He wanted his people to be able to read, which was radical at a time when most kings considered literacy a suspicious foreign hobby. By the time he died in 899, Alfred had transformed Wessex from next on the Viking list into the foundation of what would eventually become England. He is the only English king officially called the Great, partly for his achievements, and partly because Alfred the reasonably competent didn't look as good on statues. Today Alfred is remembered as a warrior, a scholar, and the patron saint of burnt cakes. His life proved that with enough determination, organisation, and emergency marshes, even a small soggy kingdom can stand up to men in horned helmets, who, disappointingly, probably didn't even have horns. And that was Alfred, the great king, bookworm, cake wrecker, and the first Englishman to realise that national survival requires both swords and a decent library card. Charles Darwin was born in 1809, which was a time when people believed God had personally arranged every animal on Earth like ornaments on a very large mantelpiece. Young Charles was expected to become a doctor, but he quickly discovered he didn't enjoy the sight of blood, screaming patients, or doctors, which ruled out most of medicine. Instead, he went to study to be a vicar, mainly because it involved long walks, thinking about beetles, and not being shouted at by surgeons. Darwin was extremely fond of beetles. In fact, he once tried to carry so many beetles at once that one of them escaped into his mouth, which science later called the first peer-reviewed snack. His life changed when he was invited to sail on HMS Beagle, a ship named after a dog, even though it was technically a boat. The voyage was meant to last 2 years, but went on for 5. Possibly because the captain kept stopping to ask for directions from turtles. Darwin visited the Galapagos Islands, where he noticed that the finches were all slightly different, like a collection of spoons that had attended different schools. This led him to wonder whether animals might change over time, instead of arriving fully assembled like Victorian furniture. He called this idea natural selection, which is basically nature saying, I like that one. The rest can go in the loft. Darwin spent years thinking about his theory, partly because he wanted to be sure, and partly because he was terrified that Victorian society would react by fainting onto a chaise longue. He filled notebooks with careful observations such as pigeons, surprisingly complicated, and worms, doing more than we think emotionally. In 1859 he